COVID pandemic has led to more controls and more surveillance. Are liberal values and democracy under threat?
I think they are under threat, not just from COVID, but from the rise of new authoritarian regimes and new authoritarian technologies all over the world. But also, I think that COVID should remind us of the need for human cooperation in the face of such challenges. And the best way to ensure this human cooperation is through democracy. So if we react to this crisis in a wise way, I think it should strengthen democratic government.
Data is the holy grail of our times. What can we do as citizens in order to prevent the return of fascism and the rise of new dictatorships?
Well, first of all, don't vote for them into office. I mean, in many cases, authoritarian rulers rise to power in democratic means, as famously happened with Hitler in Germany in the 1930s. The thing is that you can vote for them in, but then you can never vote for them out, because once in power, they don't allow the continuation of real democracy. Also, people, if you think about, you ask about data in relation to that, we should regulate the flow of data in the world. And I think that we should follow three main principles. First of all, my data should always be used to help me and protect me, not to manipulate me. If a corporation or a government agency is collecting my personal data in order to manipulate and control me, this should be stopped. And it can be stopped. This is something that we can still do. The second principle is that we should never allow too much data to be concentrated in any one place. Whether it is a corporation or a government agency or whatever, the over-concentration of data is the highway to dictatorship. Because once one corporation or one government has everybody's data, then they have a huge advantage over everybody else, and they can control and manipulate everybody. Just imagine the situation, let's say in Greece, in 20 years, when somebody, maybe a corporation, maybe some foreign government, has the entire personal data of every journalist, every politician, every judge, every military officer, everything they've done in life, their medical history, their sexual history, their legal history. In such a situation, it's probably no longer an independent country, and certainly not a democratic country. So we should need to prevent this kind of concentration of all the data in one place. And thirdly, if you think again about surveillance and data, the third principle is that surveillance must always go both ways. Not just from up down, but also from down up. What does it mean? That when you have the big corporations and the governments collecting data on us and monitoring us, simultaneously, they should be more transparent and we should be able to monitor them. Yes, the new technologies enable greater monitoring, and this is good sometimes. Like in a time of a pandemic, it's good that the government can collect more information about the medical condition of citizens to prevent the spread of pandemics. This is good, as long as it is balanced. If at the same time that you increase surveillance of the citizens, you also increase surveillance of the government, for instance, financial expenses. Governments are now spending billions of euros and dollars very quickly. This should be more transparent. It should be easier for citizens to monitor who is getting the money and who is making the decisions and why. If you have this kind of two-way surveillance, it keeps the balance. If the surveillance only goes one way, the government or the big corporations know an awful lot about me, but I can't know what they're doing. This is the high road to a dictatorial situation.
Homo sapiens is the most successful human being, but you predict that he will disappear in a few decades. Please describe us the new species that is going to emerge.
I don't know. I mean, when I say that Homo sapiens will disappear within not a few decades, but say a century or two, I don't mean that we'll destroy ourselves in some big nuclear war, even though this can happen, of course. I think it's less likely. It's more likely that with the help of new technologies, especially bioengineering and artificial intelligence, we will change our own bodies and brains and minds, and we'll also start to create new entities which will be very different from us, maybe entities which are not even organic. You know, for 4 billion years of evolution, all of life on Earth was organic. If you think about dinosaurs or viruses or human beings, we are similar. We are made of organic compounds. We are subject to organic biochemistry. Now we are gaining the technology to create new kinds of beings, either cyborgs, which combine organic with inorganic parts to create a cyborg, or a completely inorganic entity like artificial intelligence. And it's quite likely that within a century or two, it will be these kinds of entities which will dominate the planet and not organic life like us. Now, what kind of entities they will be, we cannot even imagine, because even our imagination is the product of organic biochemistry. Our brain is an organic machine. So once you leave the organic realm and you start to create a new kind of life, inorganic life, what shapes it will take is, you know, if you compare a human being and a chimpanzee, there are a lot of differences, of course, but essentially they are very similar. The body looks the same, the brain looks the same, even emotionally and socially, we share a lot of our emotions and our social habits with chimpanzees. You now try to imagine some kind of cyborg or AI in the 22nd century, it will be far more different from us than a chimpanzee.
We live in a globalized society, but we also witness the return to nation state. In your opinion, are international organizations or institutions like United Nations and European Union going to survive?
Some of them certainly. I'm not sure about the individual fate of each institution, but you know, the basic problems facing humankind are global, and they simply cannot be solved on the basis of a single nation state. If you think about COVID, it's an obvious example. You can lock down your population and vaccinate everybody and completely get rid, let's say, of the disease in your country. But if it goes on in other countries, there will be mutations, there will be new variations, and then maybe there is a mutation which overcomes your vaccine and it will come back and spread again. So as long as you haven't solved the problem globally, no country can feel secure. It's the same with climate change, that you can have the most wonderful climate policy in your country, but if China and the US and Russia are not adopting similar policies, it won't help you. You would still suffer the consequences of climate change. And it's also true of what we just talked about, all these new technologies. Like when you imagine what kind of changes we will do, like with genetic engineering to humans, or what kind of artificial intelligence we will create, there are many scary scenarios. And in order to prevent the worst outcomes, we need global agreement on how to use these technologies. Because if Greece, for example, or the entire European Union decides to ban genetic engineering on human babies, or decides to ban autonomous weapon systems, killer robots, it won't help if Israel and Korea and Brazil and the US are doing it. Because very quickly the Europeans will say, hey, we are being left behind. So we also may have to do it. Unless you have some kind of global agreement on what should and shouldn't be done with genetic engineering or artificial intelligence, you cannot regulate it on a national level. So there is still important roles to be played by the nation state. Things like healthcare and education and taxation and all these, they are still mainly on the level of the nation. But the really big problems of the 21st century, they demand global cooperation.
And which is your biggest fear for tomorrow?
Maybe that we will lose our humanity without even understanding what we are losing. There are obvious, kind of physical fears that there will be a nuclear war and it destroys everything. But there is also this fear that we will use the new technologies to change ourselves in ways which will destroy our humanity. And we won't understand what we are doing. If you, for example, give corporations and armies the authority, the power to start changing human bodies, to start changing human brains and minds, they are likely to try and enhance qualities that they think are necessary, like intelligence, like discipline. Everybody wants intelligent and disciplined soldiers and workers, while other qualities will be neglected, for example, spirituality, or artistic sensibility, or compassion. So we might end up with humans, or some kind of entities, which are very intelligent and very disciplined, but have no spiritual depth, have no artistic sensitivity, have no compassion. And this will be not an upgrade, this will actually be a downgrade. And it's a real danger. You just need to look at what we did to animals. If you looked, say, at cows and chickens and so forth, what we did to them with our technology, you compare cows today or chickens today to chickens 10,000 years ago, wild chickens, then we created not an upgrade of the chicken, but a real downgrade. The chickens that we have engineered, they can barely walk. They lost so much of their physical and even social abilities because of what we did to them. And there is a huge danger we will do the same thing to human beings.